sun did not smile upon the industrial sprawl of Tarleton, Ohio. Rather, it interrogated it. On this beautiful, cloudless morning, the light was a harsh prosecutor, exposing the soot-stained brickwork of the factories and the skeletal iron ribs of the airship docks with an unforgiving glare. It was a day that demanded truth, stripping away the noir shadows that usually draped the city like a mourner's veil. Baroness Angela Phoenix sat in the high-ceilinged library of Phoenix Manor, shielded from the celestial intrusion by heavy velvet curtains drawn tight. A single shaft of light, dust motes dancing within it like suspended history, fell across the mahogany desk where the legacy of a dead revolution lay scattered. She was not looking at blueprints for a new steam engine or the autopsy reports of a murder victim, but at a sheaf of yellowed parchment that crackled delicately under her gloved fingertips, while her left eye, dark and human, saw only the brittle yellowed parchment of a century-old correspondence. The mechanical sentinel of her right perceived the heat signatures of fading ink and the microscopic topography of the paper fibres. "Oh, Benjamin," she whispered, her voice a mixture of reverence and sorrow. "You clever, devious old wizard." She ran a gloved finger over the signature. B. Franklin. She admired Franklin. In the history books, he was painted as a chaotic genius, a wayward son who had returned to the fold. But Angela saw him as a kindred spirit, an inventor who saw the world not as it was, but as it could be, as something that could be improved. He was a Promethean figure who had stolen fire from the gods, but failed to steal a nation from a king. She traced the loops of his signature. The Great Rebellion of 1770 had sputtered out not in glory, but in a muddy surrender at Yorktown once the French aid failed to materialize. And yet, the gallows had remained remarkably empty. It was Franklin's silver tongue, arguably his greatest asset, that had saved the neck of many a good man. Angela leaned back, the leather of her chair creaking. It was one of history's great anomalies. When the Sons of Liberty were rounded up, the Crown had prepared the hangman's noose for Washington, Jefferson, Adams, and many more. It was Franklin who had interceded. Even in defeat, the man's charisma was a weapon more potent than any cannon. He had stood before the Crown and argued that the rebels were not traitors, but wayward children acting out of a desire for parental improvement. He convinced the king that leniency and reform would forge a stronger chain than tyranny ever could. Because of him, the gallows claimed only a few hundred of the most violent agitators, mostly those who had participated in the lynchings or torture of loyalist civilians or other acts of terrorism, whereas many of the men in the Continental Army or government were granted the Great Pardon and allowed to fade into obscurity. The United British Colonies of America had survived, stitched back together with diplomatic silk, but rumours, like persistent rust, never slept. "The Liberty Fund," Angela whispered, testing the weight of the myth. Legend spoke of a vast treasure gathered by the rebels when defeat became inevitable. It was a war chest intended to fund a second uprising, a resurrection of hostilities that never came to pass, because Franklin, the keeper of the secret, died before the spark could catch. It was a war chest for a second revolution that never came, a fortune lost to time, waiting for a worthy heir. For 100 years, it was dismissed as a fairy tale for malcontents. But now before her lay a newly acquired acquisition, purchased at a quiet auction from an estate in Versailles, a bundle of letters written by Dr. Benjamin Franklin to King Louis XVI of France, dated late 1777. History recorded these as the final apologies of a defeated diplomat. To the naked eye, the letter was a humble plea for the French king to grant asylum to refugees, but under the Baroness's enhanced gaze, the chemistry of the ink betrayed a ghost. Franklin had used two distinct mixtures. The primary ink, iron gall-based, had faded naturally. The secondary ink, laced with a trace of cobalt salt, remained chemically distinct, hiding in the loops of the Y's and the crosses of the T's. Angela leaned closer, the servos in her brass eye humming a high-pitched tune audible only to her as she switched to the ultraviolet spectrum and smiled as it all fell into place.